Welcome to the Extraordinary Vets podcast, where we believe that every career tells a story. I'm your host, Donna Harris. I'm a veterinarian at Michigan State University and a futurist. My mission is to tell the stories of those creating the future of our profession. This episode will be fun because we're able to talk with Dr. Charlotte Lacroix. She's an equine veterinarian, but for the last 20 plus years has been practicing law as an attorney with her own firm that works exclusively within the veterinary profession. I've known Dr. Lacroix for many years. We've worked together on some projects, but I don't even know her career story, so this will be great. Welcome, Dr. Lacroix.
Thank you for having me. I feel very privileged to be here.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Before we talk about your veterinary journey, tell us about being both a veterinarian and attorney. Like, what type of attorney work do you do for veterinarians?
Well, there's generally about two species of attorneys. There's litigators and then there's transactional or business. Now, of course, there's attorneys that do a little bit of everything as well. But I'm really what is known as a business attorney. And you will not find me in a courtroom unless I'm an expert witness. And I work with veterinarians nationwide, mainly with their contractual and negotiation needs. I really love issue spotting, relationships between people who want to make something happen and trying to figure out how do we put all that together, and has everybody thought about the issues before coming together and being in a business relationship for 2 years and then something happens because they didn't know to anticipate it. So I'm kind of like a diagnostician for veterinarians as they engage in multiple contractual issues. And we deal with all sorts of business related matters. That could be employment agreements and partnerships or startups, or we also deal with client issues as well as employee related issues. So really the whole gamut of legal problems that veterinarians face on a day-to-day basis. And if it gets cantankerous and there's going to be some form of lawsuit, then we would go ahead and refer that to a litigator if we can't resolve it internally.
So you're a veterinary relationship attorney, sounds like.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
You kind of make things work. It's putting pieces together.
Well, I can't wait to hear how you got there. So let's go back to the young Charlotte. You went to UC Davis for veterinary school. We had the privilege of having the current dean on an episode, so that was fun. We did a special dean's episode and he came on. So am I right to assume you grew up in California? If you started as an equine veterinarian, were you a horsey type of teenager? And when did you decide to be a vet?
So actually, I was born in Illinois in the Midwest and was raised in New Jersey because my father was moved out there, and went to grade school and high school. Both of my parents were intellectuals. I have no idea where the animal gene came from, but I'm one of those children. I wanted a cat, a dog. I wasn't allowed to have those because they chase birds. So, I had a goat as a child, and I also had a miniature donkey as a child because my parents were okay with that. And I loved horses. I rode horses as a child, and I just love animals. And so when I applied I have very supportive parents. I was a B+ student and I want to go to veterinary school. And so I knew that I should hedge my bets, and I applied to every undergrad that had a veterinary school. I figured if I got into the undergrad, that would increase my chances. So I was not Ivy League material, so I didn't get into Penn or Cornell, but I got into all the others. And I have a big brother, and I said, so where do I go? Do I go to Illinois? Do I go to Florida? Do I go to Louisiana? He goes, California? That's kind of a no-brainer.
Really?
So, yeah. So I listened to my big brother, and actually he helped me drive out there. I went out, and those were the golden days when you could set up a residency within 3 months. You needed a driver's license. So I quickly became a resident, did my 4 years at Davis, worked at the vet school, got into the vet school. And then I did an internship at Guelph. So I slowly migrated back. And then as I was completing my internship, the equine veterinarian who I had spent a lot of time as a child called me up and said, Charlotte, do you want a job? And it was my dream job because he, and still has, an equine referral practice with performance horses. And then I worked for him a couple of years. So it was a great, great experience.
Where was that job at?
So it was Brendan Furlong and Associates in Oldwick, New Jersey.
In New Jersey. Okay, so you went from Jersey, Illinois to Jersey to California to Guelph. And when you were at Guelph, was it an equine internship?
Yes.
So you were really heading down the equine pathway.
Well, yeah, and Davis Innovative School had tracking system when I went through there. So as a fourth year, I did the equine track. So I knew I wanted to be an equine veterinarian.
And I assume until that job opened up back in Jersey, that you were thinking going on to do a residency, become a specialist?
Well, no, I actually was thinking, I did want to do private practice because I wasn't sure I wanted to do any specialty at that time. I was, I hadn't started doing a job search yet, but of course I was thinking of going back to California. I was thinking maybe Kentucky. And then it was really no effort on my part. He called me up and asked me if I wanted a job. So I go, yeah, I'll take it,
Right. I can bet. So as if going through veterinary school, especially Davis, is not hard enough, what were you thinking going back to law school equally difficult? And how long did you stay in practice? How did that transition? How did you even think about that?
Yeah, so I was about 3.5 years in practice, loved what I did. But I don't know, I've always had an advocacy sense in my bones, if you will. My brother was an international corporate lawyer. I thought that what he was doing was always really cool, and the deal making, and of course he'd talk about it. I mean, I didn't think anything of it at, certainly at the time. I had been introduced to Dr. Jim Wilson, who taught veterinary law at UC Davis. And then I accompanied him at a couple of classes when he taught at the University of Pennsylvania. He helped me negotiate my contract. And I just thought it was really fascinating what he did. And yeah, I kind of transitioned. But law school is like 3 years. It's kind of like a residency. It's not medicine. And it's taught backwards to medicine. So in veterinary medicine, you learn all the stuff and then you get an exam. Law school is case-based learning. So you're given the cases and you kind of have to figure out what the outcome is. And I found it so difficult the first 6 months. I'm like, they didn't even give me the physiology. And they want me to it was really, really hard.
I bet.
But they just do it backwards, but it's both analytical. They're both analytical thinking. And this is why I love consulting with veterinarians, is because veterinarians are like smartest people on the planet. They're analytical thinkers. They're logic based, and you can explain things to them. And sometimes I use veterinary analogies and things like that so that they understand, and you really feel a partnership with your client. For me, it's all about informing the client and informed decisions and empowering them, rather than saying, here's the contract, this is what you should sign, and that's it, right? Just do it because I tell you how to do it. That's not fun. The fun is really helping or being in my client's space, like understanding what they're going through and what's important to them and what's less, because I don't know what's important to them. I can't assume I know that. So that journey with my clients is what's so very rewarding.
Which was more difficult at the time for you? Veterinary school, do you remember, or the law school? You said
law school. Law school was hard. I mean, vet school, don't get me wrong, was not easy. But law school was more difficult because it was backwards. I had been indoctrinated. You learn the basics first, and then you apply it. Where law school is like you learn to read by reading. That was really frustrating to me. Whereas in veterinary school, they teach you alphabet and how to read, and then you apply it. And then when you study for the bar, that's finally when they give you these books and they give you what they call the black letter law, which is principles of law. You're like, why didn't they do that the first year?
Exactly.
And it's just, and part of it is a Socratic method. I mean, lawyers in general, you learn to be confronted and to have conflict and to have to stand on your feet, which is a skill you really have to learn when you're an advocate for somebody else, because you can't be intimidated by the other side. And law school kind of rebuilds you that way. Because believe it or not, I'm an introvert. I'm shy. and I hate conflict.
Mm.
But bring it on for when I represent somebody, that's a whole different story. Like, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, bring it on. Let's see, what do you got? You know,
You can just put on a whole new persona.
yeah, you just think for them, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so rewarding.
So you must, because you are out in practice and you get what it was like, you must have start with some credibility to your veterinary clients because I'm sure there's a ton of lawyers out there or attorneys that can do just as well and they're not veterinarians, but for some reason I would think you get some credibility from day one with your veterinary clients because you get it.
Yeah, you speak the language, right? And here's the thing, and I don't know if this comes through or not, and I really believe this from, I know it sounds corny, from the bottom of my heart, but these are my peeps. This is my family, and I'm really empathetic and passionate about working with my clients and pulling out of them. Like, when you go through law school, it changes you permanently. And I had a senior lawyer said this to me. He says, once you become a lawyer, you can never have a normal conversation with people. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, when people talk to you, you're constantly thinking, and you can't help it as to why what they just said doesn't make sense, inconsistent, or illogical. And it's true. And I have clients that come up to me, and they say, I want this. And I say, okay, did you think of this? Did you think of that? And they're like, oh, maybe I don't want that. And it's partly because they didn't really understand the consequence or the context or how it would unfold, if you will. So we help design whatever really needs to be designed. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a veterinarian first. I feel really empathetic about what I do and the colleagues that I can help.
Well, I can imagine that when you do help a veterinarian that maybe didn't do everything perfect in a situation, at least you can empathize why they went down the path they did. I can imagine it's rarely out of negative intent.
No, veterinarians are, yeah. And I mean, veterinarians are scientists and analytical and logical, but they also make many decisions based on their heart and their guts. And sometimes, they go into the wrong direction lots of times because they trust without verifying, or they trust what people say, or they hear something that really wasn't said, and because there's lots of people that are entering in our industry and they want to get a piece of the action, if you will, right? And everybody's entitled to do this. This is a capitalistic country. That's exactly what we're made of. But, sometimes it takes advantage, certainly it potentially takes advantage of some veterinarians sometimes. But sometimes, lots of times also there's great opportunities to be had because you're bringing people from the outside that might have better business knowledge or more financial backing. So there's lots of synergies there that benefit everyone, the veterinarian, the business investors, the pet owners, the pets in particular, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking you do some teaching, you teach at Michigan State, you teach at some other veterinary schools. And when I talk to students, they think it's clinical medicine or bust, right? They're in school for clinical medicine. But then they get out of school and they think about what else can I do, but they don't want to abandon the veterinary profession. And you found a way to not abandon the veterinary profession, but also maybe not do so much clinical medicine. So what words of encouragement can you give to some of those students that think, well, if I am not a clinical veterinarian, I'm not a veterinarian?
Isn't it funny how we're so loyal to our profession?
We are.
And that's a good thing, because I think part of being a veterinarian and why people like hanging with us is we're truly sincere. We're grounded. I mean, yeah, plenty of us are nuts, but that's okay. That's part of it. But really, I mean, look, talk to people that have worked in pharmaceutical or human pharmaceuticals. They can make a ton of money that they come back to veterinary medicine. And I've talked to a lot of them. So have you. And they're like, I'll never leave veterinary medicine. The people are great in veterinary medicine. Right. We don't have these big egos and we're grounded. And here's the thing. And, what you make of your education and training So you evolve. That's not an abandonment. That's evolution. And that's an extension. And many of us still continue to contribute to the profession in a different way, not necessarily a clinical way. And even if you leave the profession altogether, that's okay. The training in of itself and having been part of this community makes you who you are. And however you can add to society and your community and your colleagues, that, really that defines you. And so this was a stepping stone. It's not an abandonment.
I love that. I hope some people that are thinking about that with the profession take those words to heart. So many of us wanted to be a veterinarian at such a young age that it feels like a calling instead of a choice. We feel like we didn't have a choice.
Yeah, it is a calling. It's like the love of horses. That's a calling. Because that makes no financial sense either.
For some of you, I'm going to leave that horse comment for you.
I guess what I want to say is, like, each person should feel that they have the freedom to be who they want to be as a professional. And that's okay.
Yeah, in different phases for different types of work, we can all contribute to the profession, I'm sure. So let's talk about some of the things that you do in your law firm that I think people might be interested in. One of the things you mentioned you did is looking at employment contracts, and I'm sure a lot of that is with young veterinarians. When you think of looking at a young, we call them associates in the profession, so they don't own the practice, but they're going to go work for somebody. When you think about helping somebody look through a contract, an employment contract, what are some of the big red flags you look like? Like, what's the reddest of the red flags you think about in today's young vets? Maybe they get so excited about getting that first couple jobs that they might overlook.
Well, I think so. There's definitely things that overlook, but I think one of their biggest mistakes is, and I'm not trying to make this as a self-serving statement, but they need to have their contracts reviewed by a professional, meaning an attorney who, for a living, reviews contracts. So not an attorney that does trust and estates or family law or real estate or because they don't know what to look for. So they understand principles of contract law, but the issue is when you're an employee, you're looking for a couple things. You're looking for predictability and security with respect to your duties, your compensation, your work schedule, your benefits, and what, if any, restrictive covenants are you going to have to agree to, which will impact your ability to move on once you've accepted this employment. A lot of these arrangements nowadays, depending who the employer is, your compensation, benefits, and work schedule are not actually predictable. Well, they're predictable, but they're not secure. In other words, they'll tell you you'll work approximately 4 days a week, approximately 35 hours a week. And then there's a sentence somewhere that says the employer can change your work schedule and your hours may change based on the needs of the practice. Well, who do you think determines the needs of the practice? As to benefits, they'll say, verbally they'll say we provide you with health insurance and dues and CE and PTO. But in the contract, the agreement, it says we will provide you with benefits commensurable with what we provide all our other veterinarians. So that means when the benefits change for their other vets, so they tell you that they have a 401k, but then 2 months later after you started, they take the 401k away or whatever. And so in that case, it's not even, certainly predictable. And then your duties, you think that they're clinical, but then you're brought in and say, well, can you help set a training SOPs to our CSRs or specialists in particular? Can you go ahead and do dinner meetings? Can you go knock doors at RDVMs and meet with them? And then you're measured based on your productivity, which you're not productive when you're doing all those things, which really isn't fair. Right. I would also caution associates on equity arrangements that are provided to them, because equity arrangements meaning you feel like you're part of it. You're given some stock. Sometimes you're given it. Sometimes you pay. You may not be able to get out of those equity documents, and it's not sure when you'll ever get the return on investment. But I've had associates who say, well, I don't want to be subject to that stock anymore because it has a non-compete that's more onerous than the one in my employment agreement. And I want to get out of it. And guess what? The company says, we're not buying you out. So you're stuck.
Yeah.
So actually, I was interviewed by Vin. So anybody in your podcast who's interested, they can go look up the Vin article on equity.
Good.
And get some, information.
Good. Shout out to Vin, the Veterinary Information Network.
Practical advice: don't sign a non-compete that's longer than 1 year. But look at your state. Some states now don't even allow. There's a lot of states now that are either don't enforce non-competes, or there's lots of things like threshold minimums or certain things that have to be provided in order for it to be enforceable.
I tell you, the take home for me of that conversation right there is, if you have an Uncle Bob or your brother Doug is a lawyer or an attorney and they don't have experience in veterinary medicine, go someplace else. I mean, they may be wonderful people, but they really need to know the profession.
Yeah, it's like asking an equine practitioner to do a laminectomy on a dachshund.
No, thank you.
Right? They're a veterinarian. The public doesn't know. So lawyers are very specialized as well.
Sure. And I think that's an important take home. So I'm going to ask you some tougher questions here, maybe. You see the profession from a different lens. So let's talk about the future of the profession from your lens, from the legal aspect. So some groups lately, I've seen it pop back up. It's popped up and down the last 20 years or so. They like pets to have some sort of legal status, right? So right now, pets are considered property, right? Like my car. If they legally become a sentient being or some family member classification, how would that change the way veterinarians need to practice medicine? What's your thoughts on that?
So I've always found this to be a bit of a conundrum. So you would think, or the outside world is saying, animals are more valuable. If there's a mistake, you veterinarians are going to have to compensate the pet owner more money than you currently have to, because that will compensate that pet owner. So you just said this earlier. We veterinarians, it's a calling. We're not motivated by millions of dollars because there's a better way. There's, other forms of education that you can get to do that. It truly is a calling. And veterinarians practice medicine because, they really care about their patients. They're always trying to do the best with their patients. And when their pet owners can't always afford things that the veterinarian is suggesting, veterinarians will try to make something work out, certainly to make that happen. I don't think it's going to improve medicine if we allow greater damages in the event the loss of the pet. And by the way, who do you think is going to end up paying for that in the long run? It's just going to increase our fees. As malpractice insurance, certainly for small veterinarians, is what, $300 to $400. Equine more, large animal more, because of potential humans getting hurt. And you can't even so in human to human relationships, like if somebody killed my brother or made a huge mistake on my brother, and I was close to my brother lived with me or whatever, I don't get any money there. Parents can't get money for the loss of their children. So you have to look at this in the context of other aspects of law and human to human, it's certainly human to human relationships. So I believe that animals are not property. I believe that they are sentient beings. I believe that they can feel. I believe we don't understand them in many ways because they're superior to us. But that doesn't mean that placing a higher value on them changes how medicine is practiced or is going to value them more or devalue. It's to think that money can replace everything, I think, is short-sighted. Yes, that's how society works, particularly in this country, but I'm not sure that's the right answer, as it can lead to potential damages. And what you call them, property, sentient beings, that's semantics in a way. That animal to that person is important, and that veterinary relationship with that pet owner is important. And I'm not sure that will ever change, because veterinarians is who they are. They really care about that connection, and they connect with animals. That's what makes them special people.
Yeah. And I think most veterinarians agree with you that the animals are, in many respects, smarter. You want to know who's smart in my family? Ask the Jack Russell, right? He's the smartest one in the room, always. So I get that.
And I don't want to make veterinarians defensive and pull away from their clients because they're scared of the clients. Because the veterinarian's true nature is to connect with the pet owners and the client. I mean, how many veterinarians are actually therapists to their clients? How much time do we spend nurturing pet owners? Well, if we start having this adversarial relationship because we're afraid of making a mistake or we're afraid of cutting corners to make this happen, and yes, there might be a bad outcome, and then we're defensive, and then we're going to be just check the box doctors, what is that going to do to the profession? That's a bit what's happening to human medicine. It's check the box doctors. They just check the box, and it's process over people. And the fear of litigation and those things creates process over people. And I don't want that to happen to our profession.
That's a really good perspective to think about. So something else that's kind of a thorny issue in the last 20 years, many practices, primarily small animal, but also some mixed and equine, have been consolidated by corporations or private equity groups or even individuals that have bought numerous practices, and they've kind of consolidated all of these practices with more emphasis on revenue generation. Do you see that as positive or negative in the profession? And I know, full disclosure, you work on some of those transactions. That doesn't make it good or bad, but what's your thought about that being positive or negative for the profession?
Well, like everything, I think there's some positive and then there's certainly negative, and these things will get flushed out over time. Some of the positive aspects is that these companies have invested into the veterinary community, whether it's marketing, whether it's pet education, whether it's innovation and development and investment in medical monitors or better research in pet foods, or there's a lot to have been gained by people investing in our industry above and beyond just what the veterinary community in of itself can do, and also educating pet owners about the importance of pet care. So we have synergies with these corporations. There's no doubt the profession has benefited. Individual veterinarians have benefited. But yes, the downside is that, corporations have certain profit requirements, and we see this, right? They own more than, I don't know if it's 85 or 90% of specialty and ER practices. We've heard stories of people having to put a second mortgage on their homes. What's so difficult, I think, is, these are dogs and cats, and people feel so guilty of not doing the best, and they're left with putting a second mortgage on their home or feeling shame and feeling embarrassment and feeling guilt. And rather than helping people not feel that shame and say, look, it's okay. It's okay to not spend an inordinate amount of money to extend the pet's life 3 months, a year, 2 years. It's okay to make those difficult decisions. It's okay to pick the education of your children over extending the life of this pet. It's okay to put food on your table rather than extending the life of your pet, right? It's okay for you not to put a second mortgage on your house and not to extend. We don't give them the open window. And I think, quite frankly, I think privately owned practices have done that better in the past. And I think veterinarians don't necessarily get to act like they want to act, maybe when they have a boss that, says process over people, and do all these tests and, don't cut corners because you'll get sued. Or I think that's the bad side. I think we've dehumanized the delivery of veterinary medicine. And we're seeing it, right? I mean, you go look at Freakonomics, or like, people are talking about it. It's in New York Times articles. And so this is not me saying this. The public is saying this, and others are writing and speaking about this, and where do we find that equilibrium? And
Yeah.
we all know veterinarians aren't the best business owners. Many practices aren't that profitable, but veterinarians don't care. They get their salaries, and we tend to be very frugal in our profession. But when you're working for other types of employers, that there are certain demands being placed on veterinarians. And yes, there are veterinarians being told your average client transaction rate isn't high enough. You need to up your rate. And it's focusing on the economics, and that's the bad part. I don't think that's a good part.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, on that note, what do you think we have exciting to look forward to? 10, 20 years from now, do we have some exciting things in the profession? What do you think? Still people want to be veterinarians?
Well, you said it was a calling, and I think that certainly will continue. How I think the exciting, I'm really positive about our industry, and I've talked to several consultants on this. We are seeing a resurgence of private ownership, people doing startups, people who have worked for someone else and said, what, I'm going to do this myself. I want to do something different. So I am really, really excited about that. In every generation, people say, well, that younger generation, they don't work as hard and they don't want to do this. And, they've been seeing that for centuries. And there are a lot of smart young veterinarians, and maybe not even young veterinarians. People have been out doing this for 15 years and like, what, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do a different business model. Here's the thing about veterinarians. We are like some of the smartest people on the planet, number one. We're creative thinkers. We evolve. We're resistant. We're persistent, and we are kind. We are kind, and we don't go into deals trying to take advantage of people. And I think we will always be able to evolve with the challenges and opportunities that are in front of us. I mean, look when the horse and carriage got replaced by the automobile. Most veterinarians were equine veterinarians taking care of horses. And like, what were those vets going to do? Well, guess what? Companion animals, right? And so I'm not worried. As a core, I'm not worried about us. I think there's so many opportunities. We'll use AI, and there's so many things that we will take advantage of. We'll figure it out.
I love that. And I think your definition and characteristics of a veterinarian will keep people, young people, being attracted to the profession. So if you could go back to the day you graduated vet school, what's the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
So I've been practicing law longer than I've been practicing veterinary medicine.
True.
And, whatever career you choose, over time, you become a product of your environment, right? You become molded by the experiences that you see basically every day. And I think veterinarians are extremely good-natured, they're kind, and they're trusting. And they should never stop being those things or having those traits. But what happens over time is people might take advantage of you, or situations might take advantage of you, and you grow cynical or untrustworthy, and it changes you. Why is it the minority of events change you when it's the majority of events that keep you who you are? So I think the one thing I would say to veterinarians is trust but verify. So trust what people say, or do, or just like medicine, right? When we have a patient that presents with a certain symptom, we might have a laboratory finding or some kind of evidence that doesn't support the story. There's something we don't trust, right? So we have that thinking ability in our minds, but the disease is our adversary. And I'm not saying that people are your adversary. That's not really how life people aren't there to be your adversary necessarily in most cases, thank goodness. But when you enter into a business relationship and people are, have their narrative and how it's going to be good for you, trust that narrative, but verify the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good things for people to think about. We have audience that is people just interested in veterinary medicine, from pre-veterinary students, veterinary students, and young veterinarians. I think your thinking about that is good for all of us. So when you think about a book or a resource from your legal perspective that every veterinarian should have as a reference point, what do you think that is? What's out there?
I have a lot of favorite books, but one of my most basic books about business that I try to have people read because it's a very quick read is called The E, like the letter E, Myth. The original author being Michael Gerber.
Yes.
The E Myth. But Peter Weinstein, who's also a veterinarian, formerly executive director of Southern California VMA, worked with the author to make it a veterinary scenario because the narrative in the original book was about a baker. And it teaches how business, there's the people that do the work, the minions, there's people that manage the work, and then there's people that envision. And to have a successful business, you need all three. But I think to have a successful career, you need all three, right? You need to do the work, but you also need to manage yourself so that you're not always working or maybe not working. And then you need to envision, like, where am I going next? What is my, career and life, and reflecting on that. And, sometimes I think we don't sit back and just think about and just reflect on where are you going?
That's great. That's a great book. I remember getting that original book in my MBA program. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think your career is very unique. I think there can't be too many veterinary attorneys out there, can there?
Well, there's probably 80 or so or 100
No,
by now. Yeah,
really?
But most either stay in medicine or they work in government or pharmaceuticals. But people that consult in the industry, there's very, very, very few of us.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, we're thrilled to have you on, Dr. Charlotte Lacroix. Thank you, and thank you for coming to Michigan State and teaching our students. Thank you for taking time out for this podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and great chatting with you, Dr. Harris, as always.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to The Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story.